Hi, I'm Leah. Some of you were asking about a reel that I posted recently, which had in it some carded waste, and were asking about how I prep that and why do I pre-card these yarn scraps and not just card them in on the blending. The reason why I card these scraps is because it gives it like a key to be able to blend in, spin into the yarn. So a bit like when you're learning to spin and your fibre breaks as you spin and you've got to join on a new piece, then you need like a fluffy end to be able to join onto the yarn that you were making. So you've got like loose ends so that they catch onto that yarn and start spinning again and join it together. Because if they're all like, if you've got two like butt ends, like spun ends that are spun all the way to the end solid, like just trying to do a little example, it's like spun like that, and you've got another end and you're spinning, they're not going to catch together properly because there's no loose fibres like little hooks, because each of the fibres is like a little hook and they grab onto each other. So it's a bit like that. Well, it's the same as that. So if I were to just put in the yarn ends as they are, they can really easily pull out of the yarn that I spin them into. Another reason that I card them as well is because I want these offcuts to blend in with the yarn that I'm making, for the type of yarns that I make and the type of yarns that I use and weave with. I want that to like flow into the, like say if I've got a quantity of wools or alpaca or whatever fibre that I'm going to be spinning, that I'm going to card this in with, because I blend this after it's made back into fluffy fibre. I will blend that. Occasionally I'll spin it as it is, but not very often. So that will get blended with some fibres that I've got. So I want that to sort of continue into the yarn and sort of blend together. I like them to not stand out as pieces of yarn. So that's another reason why I really like to card my yarns for my work. That's like the look that I like for my work. So that's the reasons why I card it. I've got here some yarn waste that I've got. There's also little bits of fabric in there and stuff like that from when I've been sewing, but the majority of it is yarn. And so every time I finish a weaving, or I've done some crocheting or some knitting, all of the offcuts and trimmings go into a bag and I save it all up because I don't waste anything. So I turn this from little stringy bits into prepared fibre, which is ready to card in with other fibres and spin, or it could be spun on its own. So it goes from that to that. Okay, so what I do, first of all, I get a bunch of fibre that I'm going to process, and in amongst there'll be the little pieces of yarn. Sometimes there's little bits of fleece and wools that have come off the carder and things like that. Sometimes there's little bits off, I use the sari silk ribbon in some of my work, and there's always a lot of threads sort of that can be pulled off the edges of the ribbon, loose ends and stuff like that. So I get that silk waste and I put that in the bag as well. Also little tiny remnants of fabrics and scraps. When I'm sewing, I use really quite tiny pieces in my work and stuff. So the bits that I get left over are usually really tiny. These little bits. And thicker hand spun yarns like that. So trimming off a piece that's been hand spun. So those are much thicker, so I'll prepare those in a different way to these thinner bits. It's worth me saying that the majority of what's in my piles of offcuts is wool. It's going to be of a high wool content because I use a lot of wool in my work, and natural fibres, like different mixed natural fibres, alpaca, and sometimes bits of silks and things like that. I do also use a small quantity of recycled yarns into my work as well. So that's like yarns that I've picked up from charity shops or yarns that people don't want and have thrown away, and I incorporate those into my weavings. But that would only be like you know, like less than the wool content. So if I was carding just pure like loads of say acrylic yarn ends, it wouldn't go quite the same as this. This has a high quantity of wool in it, so it's easier to card those fibres out. I always pre-card my scraps on just carding bats. I don't do it on drum carder or on the blending board. I always hand card the scraps on these. Before I start carding the fibres, the first thing I would do is take the yarns, and anything that's long pieces I cut up, because I don't want to ruin my carding bats. I card it on carding bats. So I don't want to ruin the pins on the carding bats, so I cut them into shorter pieces, and then they open up really easily like that. Whereas if I had a long piece, if I've got a long continuous piece of yarn, it's not going to open up easily, because it's one long piece and it's going to get all tangled and it's going to stay as yarn mostly. So the first thing I'm going to do is take those longer pieces and I trim them probably about an inch or an inch and a half, something like that, and those all go into a pile ready for carding. Any little bits of fibre, they just go in, because that's just off the drum carder, or cleaning out my carding bats of bits of fibre. And this is a hand spun one. Now this one, because it's thick, I'm not just going to cut it that way. It's also slightly felted because it's been in the bag for a long time. So I'm not just going to cut it lengthways, I'm also going to cut it down the centre into two bits, because sometimes the really thick pieces that aren't loose, like this one's quite loose, that was thick but it was loose, but when it's a bit tighter it doesn't open up properly in the carding bats, and also, like I say, it can ruin the carding bats. So the thinner bits of that I'll just cut into shorter pieces. And then the fabricy bits, there's one, little pieces of fabric, that's the thickness that it's at now, I'm going to cut that in half so that it's quite a thin strip, because what will happen to that now is all the ends will get frayed, there'll be hardly any fabric left in the middle, it'll just almost turn it partially back into fibre, and it'll have loads of little grabby ends on it to get twisted in with the yarn. Just see if there's anything else. There's another little piece of fabric. So I take it into a short piece, and then that one's thin enough, but this bit here is thicker. So I take it into a short piece, and then I'm going to cut it down the centre. So it's like 1/2 centimetre or less. And yeah, it does take a long time just prepping and sorting out the fibre, but I want to use it and I want to recycle it, and I don't, I take the time to do my work. So I am going to be spending a lot of time chopping up yarns ready to go in. So I'll stop the video there and I'll come back when it's ready to card. Okay, so I got to the end of this pile, this little piece of fabric. So a lot of it, I just get it and hold it and just keep chopping it up. Unless there's a really long piece and I need to take it out and chop it up separately to check that it is all in pieces, because I don't want to bend the pins on the carding bats. So I've already got a little bit of fibre on there, which is carded now, ready to come off. So this has gone through the bats quite a few times. I just keep turning it round, making sure I've got all the pieces of the yarn and that they're all opened up and fluffy. and then I take it off the bats. And I add that to the pile that's already done. So I just like as if I'm doing wool, I lay it on the carding bat. I'm not as particular about how I lay it on the carding bat as I am when I do wool, because this is going to get pulled all over the place. So I push it up from the top because the ends all drop off the end, and then I just start carding. And then as soon as it's gone fluffy on the top, then I'm going to take it off one of the bats. And I'm going to start carding again. And I keep turning it around. I usually have this on my lap, it's more comfortable, but just for the video, so I can show you up closer. I just keep carding it. And you can see there, it's starting to open up, but there's still lots of threads in there, so I'm going to keep carding. And if there's any long bits in there that I notice that I hadn't cut up small enough, then I'll just take it off and cut it smaller. And I'm much rougher and quicker with how I do it than when I'm doing wool, or something that I'm doing a nice fine fibre preparation, because I've just got loads of bits on there and I just want to rough them all up and open up the fibres. You can really see when you take it off the bat, you can really see all the little pieces that are still uncarded. So it looks carded on the surface, but it's not underneath. I'm going to split it in half. That one's done. And the other half. And this ends up like when you buy sari silk, the recycled sari silk fibre, not the yarn, but the fibre that can go in with spinning, it's a lot like that, only mine is mostly wool, so I don't use a lot of silk. Yeah, so it's really nice because it's this similar kind of fibres, has a similar kind of effect, but it's all out of my rubbish and it hasn't been transported or anything like that. So it's really nice to recycle. So yeah, that's where I've got to so far, and I've got piles to sort out. I just do this every so often. When I've run out of ready carded fibre in the box, then I start carding another pile, because there's always piles ready to card, because me and Elfin do a lot of fibre arts. So what I do with that then after then is I blend it either on the blending board into rollags, or sometimes I pull a roving from the drum carder and blend it on there. Different fibre preparations that I do. So that's ready to use in with other fibres that I like. And as I said, sometimes I just spin it as it is, and that's really lovely. But there's a lot of short fibres in there because I've chopped these up into small pieces, so that's like a short staple. That's a really short staple. So if you're spinning it on its own and it's been chopped up short, it is a bit different to spin with on its own. I like it blended in with a longer fibre to work with. Also, if you've got any acrylic fibres in your pile, like for instance, some of them open up, but like say this is a piece of eyelash yarn, that won't card into loose fibre like that. It will stay, it'll rough up a bit, but it'll basically stay as the eyelash yarn. But because it's got lots of little ends and fringy bits on it, it spins in really well and it stays in the yarn really, really well anyway.